Hello. Today we're here to do my last 2025 wrap-up video, because we are going to be talking about my 2025 superlatives and stats. And I think a good chunk of this is going to be voiceover because I'm not done compiling my stats yet, but I will talk to you guys about the superlative side of things. So I'm not sure which I'm going to start with in editing. You'll know when I do. All right, so in 2025, I read 172 books. Total pages were about 53 or 54,000. In terms of how that compares with my typical, that is more than last year, but still way down from where I was at previously. So I feel like my read less did not technically happen, but the spirit of it happened, I guess. Average pages in a book, about the same. I've been hovering right around 300 for the last 10 years as my average page per book. So that was consistent. My average rating was lower this year versus last year. This year it's an average of 3.49, though if I exclude DNFs, it would be 3.58. So not as many. I think I talked about this in my best of the year stuff. Not as many things I didn't like, but also fewer things that I loved. So, you kind of take the good with the bad there, I guess. And my mean and median rating are becoming closer and closer as time goes on. So I guess that 3.5 is pretty consistent for me. You will see that I spent more this year on books than I have, I think, in the last 10 years. And also the percent of them that I paid for was much higher this year. That reflects the fact that I've been really focusing on fewer advanced reader copies and really trying to read down my physical TBR. So I spent more on books. The books that I read, I was more likely to have paid for, and therefore overall in aggregate, I spent more on them. Genre-wise, mystery was once again my most read genre, but I feel like I had a much better distribution this year, and particularly this was a return to form for me in nonfiction, which that is reflective of just my evolving tastes and also having some research projects I've been working on. So it was nice to have a little bit more of a variety this year. Age-wise, I would say the thing that strikes me is I had more backlists this year relative to the last couple. Again, I think that's because I was accepting fewer advanced reader copies. And then the amount of time something spent on my TBR actually went down. I think that's because I did make it a point this year to try to read my pre-orders as they came in, because as you can see, last year was an all-time high for how long something had been on my TBR. To be fair, last year, or I guess I should say in 2024, I did specifically seek out books that had been on my TBR the longest to read those. So that was probably at least some of why that was so high. But as I've been reading through my backlist of books, I have books I've had longer and longer. But hopefully going forward, that means that I have things that have not been on my TBR nearly as long in general. So that's the dream. I'm holding steady at my percentage of like me versus not like me books. A little north of 50% seems to be where I'm pretty naturally settling in. It's been, I guess the first time I achieved that was in 2021. I honestly haven't consciously thought about that since 2021, and I think that just shows that by diversifying kind of my pipeline of books that I'm interested in and sources that I hear about books from, that just kind of naturally shows up in reading over time. So that is kind of that was my hypothesis, and I feel like I now have 5 years of data to show that hypothesis is at least maybe a theory. Maybe I can upgrade it to a full-on theory. Okay, and then more standalones this year than the last few, though not by a ton, but I think this is officially the first year where I had more standalones than in a series, so that's interesting, and that probably mirrors what my kind of general feeling on series this year was, which was just that I didn't feel like it was a big series reading year for me. In terms of authors, this is a big one, guys. This is the first time in years that I've had this many books written by non-women on my read pile. I read roughly 65% of the books that I read were by women, and then everything else was by either men or neither, in terms of either multiple authors with different genders or non-binary or whatever. So wow, it's a first, guys. It's been a long time since I've had that many non-women authors, which, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that has been a goal of mine, so I guess I'm just happy to report that. Interesting that we'll see if that trend continues next year, because I have a lot of nonfiction research that I think is in part driving that. This year I had a lot of repeat authors, though not the most ever. But I definitely was weighted more towards authors I've read from before versus new authors. And then I guess the last thing in terms of my reading for the year, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some collection stats, is just the distribution of where books were located and where authors were from. So this is where books were located. I followed someone's suggestion to nominate a country to be my fantasy location, and I made it Greenland just because it's so big. So it would have the real estate to be my fantasy location. I don't know if I've ever read a book set in Greenland. Maybe I should. I guess that big purple dot is all the books set in a fantasy world or in Greenland. So that was definitely number one for me. Number two was US. Number three is UK. That makes a lot of sense. I am a native English speaker and I'm an American, for good or for ill. So that checks out. But I do think it's interesting. I had so many set in Nepal this year just because of all the mountaineering research I was doing. So I thought that was cool to see that be number 4. And then in terms of where authors are from, again, US being the dominant one. I am an American, UK being number 2, but then, a nice smattering around the globe of, I think each of those dots represents either between 1 and I think 10. So yeah, nice little distro there. Those are all the stats for my reading this year. I did also want to briefly touch on some of the changes to my collection, just because I have been so focused on that this year. So this shows you the monthly TBR reduction is what I've labeled this. So if the bar is in the negative, that means for that month I added more books than I removed. The bar is in the positive, that means I removed more books than I added. I did still have some lingering cleanup to my spreadsheet that I had been putting off for 18 months. So that's part of why August is so high, because a lot of those are me going through and saying, hey, these are ebooks that I just don't think I'm ever going to read. So just officially taking them off of the TBR. That's part of why that is so high. But overall, I did have a net reduction of my TBR of 93 books. I added 220, I removed 313, and that means I either read them or unhauled them without reading them. So yeah, very happy with that. This is, I think, the 3rd year in a row I've had more books off than brought on. And I should mention that all those added, that does also include like collection editions or reference books. So I wouldn't say that all of those are necessarily TBR books. It's a little murky. I have to think about how I count that now that I'm looking at it. But anyway, so I'm happy that I have fewer books coming out of 2025 than I had going in, and I anticipate 2026 that will be even more so. You guys will hear about that in my 26 books I want to read in 2026 video. This is the percentage of books in my TBR, of my total collection. So about 65% of them I've read, 35% I haven't, or are purely reference books. They're not something that I'm going to read cover to cover. That feels about right. I think I would like to get that to probably closer to 75% read. I think that would be a little closer to what I'm hoping for, but we'll see kind of where things stand at the end of this year. I'll have a think about what that looks like. And then just a couple of other quick stats from my collection, in case you're interested in. My average rating at 3.57 for my total collection, which is interesting to me just because my average rating this year for reading was 3.58 or 3.59. So I think 3.5 to me is a B plus. So I feel like a B plus is kind of my overall average, and that I think is probably about right. I have a total of 3,485 books in my collection. That includes both physical and or audiobooks. So I think physically that's closer to, I think, about 1,500. So yeah, that's my collection. And then the last category I thought I'd tell you about is the ARCs, or the advanced reader copies I read this year. I read way fewer. You can see here that I have the last 2 years succeeded in reading fewer advanced reader copies. Before that, I was very consistently reading mid 50s numbers of advanced reader copies. I started making an effort in 2024 and got even stricter in 2025. And so I read a total of 17 advanced reader copies. You can see that the majority of those were mystery, thriller, speculative romance, but I did have a couple of sci-fi fantasy or horror things that I read in advance. And then in terms of average, 3.5. So I think my takeaway in general of the stats this year is that I'm a B+ reading kind of gal. That's, I think, probably good, because that to me says that I'm taking some risks. I'm having some strikeouts. If it were higher than that, that probably would mean I was playing it a little safe, or maybe I'm just still learning my own taste. I guess it depends on how you interpret that. Okay, those are the stats. So superlative time. I've got a good number of these, and I didn't pull the books, so I'll just pop in the cover in editing, I guess. So best writing of the year, I'm definitely going to give to Louise Erdrich. Not hard to guess if you have been watching my best of stuff. And also a wildly unimaginative opinion, because she's considered by many to be contemporary classic, and she's still alive. So she's already being considered one of the, into the pantheon of great American writers in her lifetime. So yeah, just really, it's not elaborate, which is often something I value in writing that I enjoy. It's not elaborate, but it's just very well considered word choice and very evocative imagery that isn't flowery. Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it. I want to read every book from her, but most of her stuff is now on my TBR because I just really love her writing. And then I'm also going to give a Lifetime Achievement Award officially, and somebody who I think I officially can add to my list of all-time favorite authors, and that is Janice Hallett. Her little section is right here. I just love what she does. I like her humor. It's not that her writing is like beautiful, but it's clear. It does voice well in terms of being able to, by nature of her project, which is mixed media, she writes mostly in dialogue. And I think she's really good at writing dialogue. I really enjoy the stories that she puts together. She does these mixed media things, and I would say that none of them yet feel like they're the same story twice. And that's impressive, I think, given that she has like a very specific style. I could see, I mean, as somebody who's currently trying to write that style, I have a deeper appreciation of the skill that it takes to do it, because it's not easy. And just her ingenuity with coming up with new stories within that kind of formal boundary she set for herself, I think is really impressive. So I'm officially, ding, putting her onto my all-time favorite authors list, because I just really love what she does. Then we're going to do most overhyped, correctly hyped, and underhyped. Most overhyped book of the year for me is Tender as the Flesh. I've already talked about that. I was pretty disappointed in it, but everybody and their mom loves that book, so what do I know? Correctly hyped is Love Medicine. Again, it's a contemporary American classic, and I am just adding my voice to the many that say that it is great. It is great. And then underhyped, I decided to go with Sheer Will by Mike Groom, because it is the most underhyped, I think, of the accounts of the 1996 Everest disaster. And I would argue maybe the best, because it was written the closest to when it happened, because he was already writing a memoir, so he basically just came home and wrote the chapter. So it's not really influenced by what other people were saying as much. It is strictly from his point of view. So he's not guessing what other people were thinking or doing. Like, he's talking about what he saw. And I think I don't remember if he had a ghostwriter with him or not, but it's very clearly written. So yeah, and I enjoyed that book as a whole because the other chapters are other climbs that he did, and I found all of it very interesting. It's hard to get a hold of in the US, I think, because it was originally published in Australia, and I don't think it was widely circulated in the US. But yeah, I would recommend it if you like a mountaineering memoir, and especially if you're interested in that particular event, I would recommend it. But that just in general, I think it was a good mountaineering memoir. So underhyped, I think. Most underhyped series, I'm gonna say Murder by Memory because I'm really pushing for you guys to read it so that we keep getting more by Olivia Waite. It is, I think, if you want a cozier version of what Malka Older has been doing with her sci-fi space lesbian detectives, if you want the cozier version of that on a spaceship, read this Murder by Memory / Dorothy Gentleman is the actual name of the series, and I'll just show you. This is the next one. I just read it. It was also really good. I think it's underhyped. I need you guys to read it because I need more. Thank you, and yes. My favorite main character, I'll say, was Tiffany Aching in the Tiffany Aching series. We meet her when she's a young girl, and we follow her through her young adulthood, and she grows a lot. She becomes such a wise woman for her age, and she has so much responsibility, too much responsibility, and she shoulders it with aplomb, and I really love her humor, which is basically just Terry Pratchett's humor. But yeah, she's I think he did a really good job of developing well-rounded young character, which can be hard, I think, sometimes to do. And I think he did that. So, favorite side character, it's a toss-up for me between Chev from Sharp Ends in the First Law world, or Logan Ninefingers, who's in many books in the First Law world series. But those were definitely my two favorite characters in that reading experience this year. I will also give a shout out to the funniest scene I read this year was in Sharp Ends with Chev when she's... You guys, if you've read the book, you know the scene. She's very exasperated by what her adventuring partner Javra is taking time to do. Oh, it was so funny. That made me LOL. Yeah, so I really enjoyed my time in First Law this year, and those were my two, I think, favorite side characters in it. I mean, Logan Ninefingers you could argue is a main character, but it's a series where there's not really a main character, so kind of hard to say. And then my favorite ensemble, I'm gonna say, is Of Monsters and Mainframes, because we have a ragtag group of robots, machines, and humans, and paranormal creatures, and they, you know, create this nice little found family by the end. And I really enjoyed, I think, pretty much all the different characters in that, and the points of views we got with that in terms of who we were kind of following. So yeah, I think that was my favorite ensemble of the year. Biggest disappointment, I'm gonna say, is One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole, just because I love Alyssa Cole so much, and I gave that book 2.5 stars. It's not the worst, far and away not the worst book I read this year, but you know, it's a I expect more from you kind of disappointment. And I expected more from her. Yeah, I think some of it is I've just realized I don't really like mysteries where DID is incorporated. I feel like did it respectfully at least, but it's the equivalent of kind of an amnesia plot or a blackout drunk plot. I just find it to be not my favorite type of mystery. Biggest accomplishment, I'm gonna say, is refinding my love of weightier books, of heavier books. When I got out of grad school, I've talked about this before, it has been nearly a decade of me getting back to routinely having heavier books in my rotation. It's not to say that I haven't had that in my reading, but I would say it's been a bigger percentage of my reading this year than it has in many years. Because especially when I was reading like 300 and 350 books a year, the percentage of those, like let's say even 40 of them were heavier nonfiction or literary fiction, that's still like barely 10% of what I was reading. And that was about all I could take. And I honestly, it was like I needed a lot of lighter stuff to sort of like dilute the mixture of heavier stuff in my reading. But this year, I feel like I've really gotten back into reading nonfiction and like really looking forward to it. Really loving Louise Erdrich reminded me how much I can love literary fiction, especially literary fiction that has a plot. Yeah, I just think I found my groove a little bit to be thinking more this year and like getting back into reading, not just being strictly for entertainment. I was doing a lot of research this year. So yeah, I don't know. That feels like my biggest accomplishment is finding that love again of heavier stuff, and still enjoying my light stuff, but having, I think, a little bit more of a balance, I guess, is what I mean by that. Biggest fail, probably stopping my TBR read down prematurely. I think I didn't do the math. I went purely based on space allocation, which made sense. Like I don't think that was like the wrong way to do it, but I think not doing the math and realizing like, okay, even if I have all of my books I've not read on one shelf, we're still talking about like more than 2 years worth of books on your shelf. And I think I'm at a place where about a year's worth, like not even, about like maybe 8 months worth of books on my physical TBR is what feels right to me. I just think I stopped too early, and so I started buying books again too soon, and now I have a bigger hill to come from. Yeah, anyway. So you'll be hearing more about that in my goals. I think I talked about that in my low buy video. Anyway, that I feel like was a little bit of a fail of not taking the one last step to really do the math and figure out if I was actually ready to stop. My favorite video, I'm gonna say, was my New England vlog, mostly just because I really enjoyed that trip. And so therefore I enjoyed the video because it reminds me of that trip. I think you guys liked that one too, more than I thought you would, but yeah, I enjoyed that video. And I saw many comments of people saying that they're going to some of the bookstores I talked about, and I love that. So go check out the best bookstore I've ever been to in that video. New favorite author, aside from Janice Hallett. I gave Janice Hallett the Lifetime Achievement Award, which basically means she's going on to my new favorite author. The other one, though, is Joe Abercrombie. Now that I'm almost all the way through the First Law series, I definitely now consider him to be a favorite author. It's interesting because I don't think I've given any of those books so far a 5-star, but I would give that series a 5-star unquestionably. Like, it's definitely a sum of its parts is greater than the whole kind of thing. Yeah, so I would definitely say he's a new favorite author, and thank God, that means Leanna can stay my friend. And a new auto-buy author for me is Yokido Ayatsuji, because I am hungry for Pushkin Press to keep cranking out these weird house books in translation. I think he's got a couple of other series people mentioned to me. So like Pushkin, Virago, I need you to like get your translators on this and start cranking these out a little quicker, because I need more and I will buy them. So, and then I didn't have a best debut this year, really, I guess maybe the debut I was most impressed by was Bob the Drag Queen, just because and he wrote Harriet Tubman Live in Concert. You just don't know. It was like a literary magical realism kind of book. Didn't know how that was going to go. I think the transition between things, like the pacing, I guess, was a little choppy for my taste, but the actual writing I thought was actually very good. So maybe the most pleasantly surprising debut I'll give to him. And then best cover, I've got 3. I think in terms of the, we definitely have the like sprayed edge trend happening right now, and like special hardcover edition. My favorite ones of those this year was By the Horns by Ruby Dixon. I think that it's really pretty, whimsical, and kind of goes with the vibe of that book well. In terms of, though, the pure cover design, I'll give the nonfiction award to The Once and Future Sex by Eleanor Yanaga. I just think that that's a beautiful cover. It came out a couple years ago, but I feel like it caught the vibe well and was well marketed, that cover. And then the other one I'll say is Of Monsters and Mainframes. I think that's a gorgeous cover. And I think that's by Bindery. So, new imprint, new publishing house. So I'm glad to see they're putting out some interesting cover art along with that. Okay, so that is going to wrap this one up. That wraps up 2025 officially, and we are officially into starting 2026 territory. Then I guess we'll be back to regularly scheduled programming, but I love end of the year, beginning of the year. I know I'm a broken record on that, but God, it's fun to make. I like the reflection aspect of it. I like watching other people's content of it. I just love it. So I hope you guys are enjoying the ride too. And yeah, hit the bell, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you want to know what I'm up to, yeah, you should still be having a lot of videos coming out in pretty quick order, because I'm trying to not let it linger too long before we get too far into the year. But yeah, I hope you're taking care of yourself. I hope you're starting off 2026 as best you possibly can, and we will just talk soon.